This is going to be a discussion about documentation for computational sciences research. Today's date is August 28th, 2007, and I'll tell you in a minute why I'm giving you the date right off the top here. My name is Carl Sovinec. I'm a professor in the engineering physics department, and I myself do computational research for plasma physics. Okay, as an introduction, let's first of all start out with a little bit of background in computational sciences. Some of you, in fact, may not have had any encounter with computational sciences before this. You're certainly familiar with experimental work or analytic theory, where you're doing calculations analytically. Well, you can think of computational sciences as being an extension of theory, but there are many cases, particularly when you want to find the results of some mathematical models for some physical system and actually want to do this in realistic conditions, that it's difficult to actually carry out an analytic calculation. So what we can do is form discretized versions of the equations that are something that the computers can deal well with and run these more realistic calculations and get results out from them for the realistic systems that we're interested in. So even though this computational sciences in a way is connected with theory, what we actually do on a day-to-day basis actually comes across a bit more like doing experimental work. We run calculations in a similar way that you run experiments and try to get results and get understanding from those results. Okay, so let's first of all talk a bit about documentation in general as far as why you'd want to do documentation. And here we're really talking about daily documentation and distinguishing that from more formal documentation like publications. The publications are important too, but here we're discussing what you do on a daily basis in order to keep track of your work. So I'd say that there's two major motivations for doing this daily documentation. One of them is that you want to save information that will let you reproduce some result later. Any really physically relevant result is something that is reproducible, and it's important to be able to go back and redo something that you found, especially if it's a really new result or something that's potentially is useful. Another reason that you want to do the daily documentation is that you really want to keep a record of what helps in doing what you're trying to accomplish, and also what doesn't work. It's just as important to save a record of what does not work so that you're not repeating the same mistakes as you progress. Okay, so let's talk a bit now about the documentation specific for the computational sciences. And first of all, we can think about things that are similar to doing documentation for experimental work. Since the work itself, as we've already mentioned, involves many trials, often running many calculations in the same way that you would run many experiments. It's good to have a notebook of some form, either a paper, hard copy notebook that you can write in, or even using some kind of notebook software on a computer that you record your entries there to keep track of your different trials. So that's pretty similar to what you do for experimental work. What's different is that the actual work that you do, the science that you do, the research that you're doing, is on a computer. So your input files, your output files for actually running whatever it is, in this case it's the calculation, whereas in the experiment it's running the experiment. In this case, that work is all on computer disk. And so we can make good use of the file systems that are on computers and take advantage of the organization that allows us to have. In addition, computers also offer programs that will help the organization out as well, including things like revision control programs that help you do algorithm development and code development work, and we'll talk about that more towards the end. Okay, so let's talk about our notebook entries. Important things to have for this daily notebook that you're keeping. First of all, you always want to date an entry, and that's why I just, for good practice, gave you a date right off the top here. And the date is very important for cross-referencing work when you come back to it later. and want to be able to find what you were doing at some point earlier or when you were working on a project. And the date itself helps for cross-referencing. You also want to keep critical information that was used in setting up a calculation, various input parameters or physical parameters that describe what the problem is about or what the calculation is going to be about, and also numerical parameters that you're using or algorithms that you're trying in running the calculation. As you're going along, however, after you've done a number of calculations, particularly in a series of calculations, it may be more convenient to just record what you're changing as you're running different calculations, and that works fine as long as you can easily backtrack to where the start of this calculation series was recorded in your notebook. Another thing that you want to have that's specific to the computational work is you want to keep track of what version of the code that you're actually running to get some calculation. Whether you're using a commercially available piece of software or even something that you yourself or your group is developing, there'll often be changes as you're going along, and you want to be able to record what version of the code you are using in order to produce some result, particularly so that if you want to go back later in time and reproduce some result, you may want to go and get that exact same version of the code, make sure you can reproduce that, and then if there are important changes, either bug fixes or improvement to the modeling capability, you can go ahead and try the calculation again with a newer version, and if there's some significant changes that are not easily understood or have some impact on what you thought were the physical results, then you can go back and compare the differences between the versions of the code and see what it is that's making the difference. Of course, getting back to the notebook, in your entries, you'll want to include a summary of the results that you got from each calculation. And again, you want to record both what was valuable, what was physically meaningful coming out of the calculation, maybe some numerical information about how well the particular setup worked in running your physical problem, but also keep a good record of what doesn't work, so that again you'll know, maybe accumulate over a series of calculations and get an idea of something that's maybe not even working in the code itself, and help track down problems and again avoid repeating the same mistakes. Another thing that you'll want to do when you're doing numerical work, computational sciences work, and since the output as well as your input files are on computer disk, you want to keep a record of, for each entry of the calculation that you're doing, where you can find the output files. Especially now, computer space, disk space has gotten very cheap. It's affordable to have lots of space to hold, usually to hold almost all your calculations unless you're doing extremely large calculations. So it doesn't make as much sense as it used to delete output files. And you can record where your output files are saved, what disk or what computer they're saved on, in order for you to find them without having to redo the calculations every time. Okay. So on the topic of storing these files, let's talk about that directly itself. The computational sciences work does have a nice advantage in that when you have all your work, meaning the research itself, the calculation results, on computer, that lets you organize the results themselves very well. And here we're referring to using the directory or folder structure that's on your computer. You can think of this as either going upward from some trunk with like a tree and going up to branches, or going the other way, going downward into a root system. And you can take advantage of those kinds of directory structures and subdirectories in order to organize your work. In many cases, you'll be working on different projects, maybe different physics applications or engineering applications with your project, and you can organize major directory levels a different directory for, or different set of directories for different projects, and then at a lower level maybe keep sets of calculations for each of those projects, and then maybe even below that have individual directories for separate calculations and to hold all the files that go with each particular calculation. And you can take advantage of the ability to name these directories. You have a lot of flexibility in how you name the directories and your files. And you can make those names relevant to the project that it's on, or the physics parameters if it's getting down to the subdirectory level where you're talking about the sets of calculations. And then maybe when you get down to the point of having directories for individual calculations, that you would just order them numerically or label them numerically. When you do have that, then you can, an important thing to do is then to keep the labels that you're using for individual calculations and write those names and those labels down in your notebook, so that your notes for that calculation will let you find just from your notes, that you can find the directories or the locations of these files and the individual calculations, the individual subdirectories that you had for the calculations. You can find the results very easily that way. So that makes it very convenient that all that work is directly on the computer. Another thing that tends to be helpful is that your files and folders on a computer will have dates recorded with the files. So they may be access dates or creation dates. And just looking at those dates sometimes, if you're looking through your directory structure and you're finding some calculation that's of interest and you want to go back and find your notes, sometimes the easiest way to do that sort of backwards cross-referencing is by taking a look at, when these files were created, and then you can go back through your notebook and find the dates that correspond to that. So that tends to be a very useful trick. And as you're going along, you'll certainly find other tricks that'll be helpful as well. Okay, the last major topic here to think about is some software opportunity for code development. And if you're working on developing your software tool that'll run your calculations, or if you and a group of people are working on this, oftentimes this code will change, maybe changing rapidly, and you'd like to be able to stay organized. And as we mentioned earlier, it's oftentimes useful to be able to back up and go to earlier versions. There is software available that lets you keep track of versions of computer codes. These are usually by names of things like revision control software, and there are a few of them out there. And what these programs do is they'll write information to a disk that'll be itself in the form of files. But instead of keeping all the complete files for the state of the code at any particular point of time, it'll save the sequence of changes that go about from bringing the code from one version to another version. You can also do more elaborate things like branch off different development versions from the main line of the development. And that lets you keep track of how the code has changed over time. And the software also makes it very easy to reproduce or to recreate exactly the code the way it was at some earlier date or when it had some earlier version label on it. Additionally, these programs help verify that when multiple people are working on the code, that there's been coordination and changes that have been made. And that also helps development and makes doesn't take away the full burden of interacting and thinking through how different changes work together, but it can facilitate doing that. In addition to actually storing these changes in the programs, or in your code, these programs will also store log messages. So that's another way that you can document, is when you're actually storing different changes in the code. And maybe one last thing on documenting in the code, that when you're writing computer programs, we always emphasize that it's important to document what you're putting into a program. And that's very important, and it gives you an opportunity to, to state explicitly what some changes or how you're doing some numerical calculation or what physical model that you're putting into the program, and describe how it works. And if somebody else comes and wants to add something to the code, then they can understand what you've done by reading your documentation and looking at the programming itself. Or even for you yourself, if you set some project aside and come back to it a year later, or need to reproduce something that it may be difficult to remember if you haven't documented in the code itself what you're doing in the programming. So that can help you out as well. Okay, so then to just summarize this discussion overall, we've talked about computational sciences and the daily documentation of doing computational science research. We talked about how it was similar to doing experimental work and the documentation that you do there when you're running a number of experiments. And you'll certainly want to keep a notebook that records similar things, except here it's for your computer calculations or for your software development. Where the computational science work can be a bit different is that the work itself is on a computer. It'll be saved on disk, and you can take advantage of the organization capability that you have when you have computer or the directory folders and the subdirectories and the structure that allows, and the flexibility in naming these directories, and then cross-referencing with your notebook. So that's it.